This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
And we're back in the dark room. Kevin Kautzman is nodding at me. That means it is time to go. Kevin, how are you doing?
Let's go. Mickey Mouse. Donald Duck.
Can you throw a Lovecraft in there? That's not bad. That's not bad. That's a Donald Duck.
My pronunciation is off, but I have the Swiss pronunciation of Cthulhu, so it's a little unusual. I didn't really roll my
right. That's pretty good. I liked it. So, as if you haven't guessed yet, we are talking Lovecraft. We're talking Disney, and to do this, for people who've listened to the show, you know how the dark room works. We've had the in-depth episode covering soup to nuts biography, talking about their work, talking about their influence on society and culture. And in the dark room, we loosen things up a little bit. We bring in some folks who maybe have a different perspective or more perspective or something to say about these figures. And we've brought in two people this time, full house. We brought in the great Ben Thomas, who helped us out with the Lovecraft core episode and also was on a Frank Herbert dark room. And is the mastermind behind House Blackwood and the OmniPark series, which we're definitely going to talk about. And we've also brought in the great writer Laird Barron. And Ben, tell us about Laird.
Laird Barron is sort of what would happen if Ernest Hemingway wrote Lovecraftian cosmic horror stories. Let me just read a little bit of background about Laird. This is stuff from Wikipedia that Laird could probably tell us himself. But he was born in Alaska, had a very harsh youth, raced the Iditarod, that's the dog sled race in Alaska, 3 times in the 1990s, and worked as a fisherman on the Bering Sea before he retired and became active as a writer.
Wow.
And I first discovered Laird Barron through reading a story called Bulldozer, which was in an anthology, and it hit me harder than anything I had read in a very long time. I would sort of describe it as an Old West version of Heart of Darkness, Conrad's Heart of Darkness, as written by Cormac McCarthy.
Wow.
And if that doesn't grab you, I don't really know what else to say.
Right on. Awesome.
I immediately went out and read everything else that he had written. And when I was putting together Back to OmniPark, the prequel book to Tales from OmniPark, which you are in, Brad. My co-editor Alicia and I decided that Laird Barron was a must-have as a featured author. He was at the top of our list. He spent a little time in the hospital earlier this year, and it was just unanimous. We're going to keep this book on hold for as long as it takes to get a story from Laird. So now he has a story in Back to OmniPark, which is on Kickstarter right now. And it's a fantastic story. And can I just say I'm so stoked to have all three of you guys in a conversation together. I'm
this is
I'm
great.
very excited. You're three of my favorite people. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and let me just pump up the OmniPark Kickstarter. Look at guys, making independent media isn't free. We do stuff on shoestring budgets. We pull together whatever we can, but when the rubber meets the road, we need a few bucks. And so Ben has wrestled the forces of darkness and light to make the first OmniPark volume appear. And the second one is waiting in the wings. Great writers like Laird Barron, Brian Evanson, a number of other people. I'm going to have Ben list myself. If you read my stuff and you like it, are in there, but we need a few bucks on the Kickstarter by July 15th. Is that right?
3 days to go.
3 days to go. Now I know we're getting close, but we need a little push.
Yeah,
so,
we are very close. A lot of good stuff is still left. We've got, in addition to hardcovers and paperbacks, we've got ebook editions. We've got cool stuff like limited edition posters, T-shirts, and also Tuckerizations from several famous authors. So if you ever want to die in a horror story, that is up for sale as well.
Well, that's pretty cool. Cool. Yeah, I mean, one of the options I know for the Kickstarter, one of the tiers is to you're basically pre-ordering the book.
Yes, in fact, a number of the tiers actually are pre-ordering the book in various forms. So you can get it. Yeah, you can pre-order a paperback, a hardcover, or an ebook, or a package of the book with some other cool souvenirs. That's mostly what we're selling right now.
Yeah. So if you think you would want the book anyway, you might as well just get in on the Kickstarter and do it that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Okay. So, well, since we're talking about it, Ben, and we'll wrap this into everything because it actually fits right in the Disney. This is why we talking Disney Lovecraft makes sense with the OmniPark alumni here. What the hell is OmniPark, Ben?
OmniPark is a theme park that existed outside of Odessa, Texas from the 70s to the early 2000s. And it consisted of 7 realms, each themed after a different area of science. But what makes OmniPark really special is that it attracted an unbelievable amount of conspiracy theorizing in the early 2000s on chat rooms and in forums. It's something that I really got pulled down that rabbit hole in the early 2000s. It was called OmniParkeology, OmniPark archaeology. There were rumors, people were speculating that it had been a government black site under the theme park cover story, that it had been a base where extraterrestrial communication took place, just all kinds of very strange, that Dalton Teague, the park's founder, was in league with the Kennedys and or the Bush family to do some kind of clandestine government research on mind control. Just a lot of really strange conspiracy theories about this park that I remember growing up with. And I was really attracted to it as a premise for a fiction anthology because I felt like it was just something radically different from anything else that was being done in horror fiction right now. And so I have had the incredible privilege of not only editing one anthology of horror fiction about OmniPark with a lot of my favorite authors, but now kickstarting this second one as well. And as you said, it's got Laird Barron, it's got Jonathan Mayberry, Haley Piper, Brian Evenson, A.C. Wise, Angela Eureka Smith. There's like 17 authors, I think, in this thing, and all of them are award winners. It's absolutely stacked. So I recommend people go check it out.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll definitely have the link to the Kickstarter in the show notes for people for sure. And it does, you mentioned possible some sort of black site, and this does call to mind the fact that our friend Uncle Walt, America's uncle, we discussed this a little bit in the core episode, but there's even more there. I mean, there is there's something about these figures once they reach a certain point where the government has to get their hands on them. don't they?
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So,
Well, that's the chicken and the egg thing too, right? Do they allow you to pass through, or how does it all work? I think it probably happens in both directions. Somebody achieves
Sure.
enough power that then they get the knock on the door, or they're knocking on the door, they make the deal.
Yeah.
You could have a little bit of agency juice as a treat.
Right.
Well, this has got, we kind of threw down the gauntlet a little bit, Ben, talking, is there some connection between Disney and Lovecraft? I'm sort of forcing the issue here, I suppose, and you had some ideas, Ben. You were immediately like, oh yeah, I totally see these connections.
I have wanted to do a Walt Disney / H.P. Lovecraft episode forever, and getting to do it with Laird Barron is like, there's nothing out, like this is the peak for me. So I'm just going to go into it. So this is a quick little list of connections, and then we can build on these. Walt Disney and H.P. Lovecraft both were master world builders. Disney built theme parks and rich animated worlds. H.P. Lovecraft built an incredibly rich fictional universe, things like the Necronomicon and the Lost City of R'lyeh, where Cthulhu lives. Both of them basically built mythological worlds that felt that they could be inhabitable from scratch. Both created culturally definitive characters. How about Mickey Mouse versus Cthulhu? How's that for a juxtaposition? Both were intensely culturally conservative and obsessed with reclaiming the past. And in particular, both of them wanted to reclaim the magic of childhood, albeit in very different ways. Both through heavy inspiration from folk tales, both were shaped by broken and disconnected family lives, and both of them remained largely solo in adulthood and middle age. So in our mind's eye, we picture them both as these solitary, sort of lonely men. And
so you're also building a little bit of a recipe for how to make some sort of, if you want to make a Walt Disney or make an H.P. Lovecraft, put all these characteristics in a blender.
But deprive them of affection in childhood, surround them with transportive literature, and let them go.
Yeah. I do like this notion of like them being interested in like reclaiming the past, but their past is entirely imaginary. Like, which
absolutely
nobody, there's nobody like that out there now.
Nostalgia is probably probably on the rise.
Yeah.
Well, interesting. Well, let me ask Laird. Let me kick it to Laird. How do you feel? Ben has described, given us a little taste of what your writing is like. How do you see the influence of Lovecraft on what you do?
Oh, I thought we were going to talk more about Lovecraft and Disney, because I'll go into this, but it's sure. I think it's actually very interesting because I've never thought of them. Obviously, there would be an awareness of one another, both being in the entertainment industry, etc. And certainly Lovecraft would be well aware of Disney, because Disney was such a huge, making the films and whatnot. But for years. Mm-hmm. But I find that actually what makes their similarities, or their the things that run parallel, actually are brought into more focus by the contrast. Like these parallels that are yet contrast, because they both want to basically create these fantasy realms, but Lovecraft is almost, whether he intended, I doubt that he intended this, but he comes off as a messianic figure, and certainly that's how a lot of modern day adherents of Lovecraft, the hardcore, he knew something, man. There's a little bit of that element, right? Like this, and where Walt Disney was more of a guru, so they were both these figures that kind of had cult, almost like a mystery cult type following over time, but radically different in how it manifested. Lovecraft is like trying to work out some real deep-seated issues, probably mother issues, and xenophobia and all this stuff, and like the reality behind all this. There's this, behind the surface, there's this facade, there's this seething mass of stuff that you should be aware of, but if you are, it's going to drive you insane. Where Lovecraft's like, let's go back to the good old days when dwarves and maidens and treasure and cast, right? Like this really civilized dark ages, but clean and almost antiseptic clean.
Yeah, so, fun. You whistle while you work, while you're dying of the plague.
Pure escape, like Walt Disney, and we're not talking about some kind of term paper dissection of what really is going on. But just on the surface, though, if you look at his obsessions, Disney's obsessions, his retreat into fantasy is similar to Lovecraft's. They're both a retreat, but where Lovecraft is trying to use monsters to tell us how much he dislikes, or at least subconsciously, he's telling us how much he dislikes immigrants, for example, people of other ethnicities. Disney may be having some of the same action going on there, but he's trying to repaint history. He's trying to give us a false history, but that is built on the bones of fairy tales. He appropriates, actual mythology and lore in such a way that, like, oh no, would this be so nice if this is how it was, to the point where he even creates a simulacrum of that, kind of a conglomeration of that, or composite of that universe. All, everything but the kitchen sink at Disneyland. You can even go there now and retreat from reality. Nobody wants to go to Lovecraft. I mean, Lovecraft wouldn't. They all would put a part together, and then you all go insane.
Yeah, Lovecraft wouldn't want to go to Lovecraft world, would he? Yeah.
And maybe that kind of answers your other question as far as Lovecraft's influence on me. I actually think Disney has as much of an influence on me or any other writer, American writer at least, as Lovecraft. Corporatism being the big bad these days. Well, and actually not just these days, but probably for the last 30 or 40 years, it's really come into its own as a subgenre of horror, the great evils of corporations. Because the bottom line is, a lot of us feel that no matter how good a corporation's intentions are, by default, they can be nothing other than what they are, which is by committee, for profit, break a lot of eggs to make an omelet kind of proposition. So
and then we see what they do when they sort of take over. They would refer to it as IP, but when you see, I grew up reading comic books, like, obsessively, Marvel comic books, right? Yep. And so there was a moment where, like, they started making them into movies, and I had a little bit of excitement. And then you sort of watch it over time, and you're like, oh, they're just, like, boiling this down into some kind of slurry that they can just pour onto any situation.
It's like the theme. They turn them into theme parks.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they really
very banal. I mean, instead of being silly and magical, they're this banal theme park ride, and slick, but not, but no. Not that you expect
everything's screen tested. Everything is sort of like, you can feel that they have a spreadsheet somewhere that like tells you what's supposed to happen.
Auto-tuned, as the kids say. It's very auto-tuned. And so even though it's not something that I would consciously talk about or think about too often, but I have to admit, I do think that if I look at my writing, and especially my latter day obsessions of my own, it has, the big bads have a tendency to be connected to government agencies, corporations, that kind of thing. Large groups that show that have, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, that there's a lot of plausible deniability, things get lost in the cracks, and they're just so big that they step on the little guy in the environment, you name it. But that said, obviously Lovecraft is at least in my early career, Lovecraft was a very overt influence. Although, to be perfectly fair, I would say that it was more secondhand Lovecraftian writing that was more of an influence than Lovecraft himself. Like, Lovecraft himself became more of a direct influence in the last 10 or 15 years of my writing than the first 10. When I was actually writing my most Lovecraftian stuff, it would be the Michael Sheas and the Karl Edward Wagners and the Fritz Leibers. Even Borges did a Lovecraft story, than pure undiluted Lovecraft, which I would say is, like I said, much more, now that I'm not writing as much of it, but I do selectively. I target every now and then I'll write a cosmic horror story, and I'm much more conscious of actual Lovecraft, how Lovecraft would approach it, as opposed to one of his circle or one of his descendants, literary descendants.
Yeah, there is an interesting, I mean, he does represent quite an interesting, it's one of those things where you kind of end up reading him even if you don't read him directly, in a certain sense, because he is sort of, his influence is omnipresent. Yeah.
this ties into another similarity between Disney and Lovecraft that is not quite as obvious, but it's the fact that both of their influence is so pervasive that you really can't imagine certain segments of culture without them. Like, what would a childhood without Disney even be? Like, it's Disney serves as a lens through which we process our own cultural history and our own folklore. Although, as Laird says, a lot of it has been whitewashed and sanitized by Disney. Most people, when they think about European folktales, think about the Disney versions of Cinderella and Snow White. And in similar ways, Lovecraft is an incredibly pervasive influence on weird fiction and horror. On the Lovecraft episode, I talked about that, Lovecraft is largely canceled by a lot of the horror community nowadays because of his, pervasive racism and various other things. But at the same time, as Laird says, even if you're influenced by other horror writers who are from later in the 20th century, they're influenced by Lovecraft. So it's you almost can't imagine what it would even be to be a 21st century horror or weird fiction writer without Lovecraft.
Yeah, this is sort of overstating it, but it'd be like trying to cancel Shakespeare. It's like, sure, but you still have to deal with, Romeo and Juliet. You still are going to use all of his tropes anyway. Yeah, yeah.
No, there's a lot to that. It's simply a fact. It's not an endorsement. It's simply, and as we change as a society, we become more critical of our past. We're definitely going through. I don't know whether it's a permanent change, whether it's a cycle, but it is a fact that we are hypercritical in some cases of what's gone before. And, as painful as it might be, I think it's a good thing. I think it's good to interrogate, especially for, middle-aged guys like me. I think it's excellent to interrogate what I ingested throughout my formative years completely uncritically, from cartoons to, from animation to Western. I mean, I read everything. I read Louis L'Amour to Barbara Cartland and Eric Van Lustbader and Borges and Hermann Hesse. And the bottom line is none of it with some of it I wasn't supposed to read it. It was too adult for me, but I did anyway. But the point was it was uncritical.
Right.
Harold Robbins smut, a men's romance, so-called. The bottom line is it's not a bad thing to look back at this stuff and say, all right, what are we doing? What are we thinking? How are my opinions informed? Basically, you want to examine your biases. And I think this is nothing to be afraid of. I don't think you necessarily have to discard. I certainly am not for rewriting these books to appease modern sensibilities at all.
Yeah. That's where my issue is too. Is like I'm fine with re-examining all of these people, but in terms of like tossing something out or changing the actual work.
Brad, you do a podcast where you profile dead artists. So
that's like it's like my day job at this point is talking about. This is when William S. Burroughs shot his wife in the face. Also,
exactly. And the last thing I'd say just on this topic is just that on one hand, on one hoof, as the Lasny would say. Yeah. There's the uncritical examination. You don't examine stuff. You just, I love it. And that's that. Right. And then become defensive about it. And then, too far the other direction is I'm throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I actually think that everybody has to choose what they can tolerate. I think the examination is important. I just think that we have to be rational about it. And I see a lot of pillaring these days of if you're not with me, you're against me. Like somebody was talking about Aikman the other day, Robert Aikman, and being attacked online because they liked them. They said, well, they're a classist and they're horrible. How can you like their writing? Yeah. And I think we have to be very careful with that. Basically making enemies of people who are not your enemy.
Yeah. Shouts out. We have a Robert Aikman episode.
It's one of my very favorite, I would say one of my very favorite authors of all time.
It fits a very particular niche. He's amazingly talented, and to throw him out on some, and he's also, anyway, I don't think you can throw him out.
I'm entirely prepared to throw out Walt Disney and dismantle the Disney Corporation, ESPN, Disney World, all of it brick by brick. Yeah. I think that as part of the coming regime change, that is going to be necessary. And the reason for this is the thing that he did to that poor owl when he was a child.
Well, we're all suffering from those.
I have just cause, and we will be seizing the endowment. The endowments, as they say. And Art of Darkness Studios will be moving to Burbank. Of course, I am being somewhat facetious. We just did Bukowski here recently, and he absolutely despised Walt Disney and everything that he stood for. Yeah. Tethering this tangent to what's been discussed thus far, a lot of those early animated films like Snow White, these are based on German folklore, which is famously, I'm not telling anybody something they don't know, grotesque and horrific. These fairy stories, this folklore, the Grimm's stories were grim, and he Americanized them. But I think it's really essential to remember too that the Amerikaner, German Americans, a great deal of Americans can trace their ancestry back to German. So there's something of a weird psychic operation being done by this gee whiz Americanization of these tales that almost borders on the magical. Like we're gonna chew up your history, your folklore, but we're gonna deracinate it, make it friendly, make it all work out in the end. It's a very American thing.
Soften the edges, make all the eyes big and dewy, and that's interesting.
Yep.
I think this ties back into the fact that Disney and Lovecraft were both fascinated particularly by European folklore, but in very different ways. So Lovecraft's longest work of nonfiction is a long essay called Supernatural Horror in Literature. And the first chapter of it is devoted entirely to the roots of horror archetypes particularly in old Germanic and Celtic folklore. Lovecraft sort of devotes a phrase here or there to Greco-Roman and what he calls Oriental folklore, and just dismisses it all out of hand as it's not dark enough. I don't think it's scary enough.
Really? That's interesting. Yeah.
And he very explicitly drew on particularly Germanic and Celtic folklore as the roots for a lot of his stories, particularly the Dream Quest stories, which are sort of what we today would call second world fantasy. They're set in a dream realm that's entirely disconnected from the realm of the physical that we live in. Disney was also obsessed with these stories, but in a very different way. He seemed to feel that these stories, Cinderella, Snow White, Pinocchio, these European folktales, were important for Americans to get back in touch with. But the route that he found back to that was almost the opposite of Lovecraft's. Rather than by trying to touch the primordial sort of Jungian elements that these stories awoke, he was interested in what could be presented to children and families in the most sanitized, agreeable way possible. I just think this is two fascinatingly contrasting ways of processing similar source material.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I had never thought about that.
A fun thought experiment would be to imagine a world where Lovecraft had some of the attributes of Disney and ended up working with the CIA to take over a big portion of Florida and create like his vision. Instead of Disney World, you have, Cthulhu World or Lovecraft World. And how amazing would that be? What a strange America. And all the sports ball that you see is rendered through, CSN, Cthulhu Sports Network, right? The old ones Sports Network, OOSN. Yeah. I mean, it's just as plausible to imagine. I mean, it's Disney's ascendancy and everything. It's all arbitrary. This world that we inherit, it could have developed along entirely different lines. And you mentioned the fact that it's hard to imagine a childhood without Disney. It's hard to imagine an adulthood without Disney. I don't know that the majority of people understand that the mouse is giving you your sports ball too.
Yeah, that's what's interesting is how pervasive it's got its hands in every pie. But then also, I mean, you have to think about talk about the notion of sort of Lovecraft, people being almost obsessively Lovecraftian in sort of practice, right? Sort of like thinking it's real or something like that. But I mean, go to one of the Disney parks and just watch the adults interact with the place. I mean, there are what we call Disney adults who go every year, every chance they get. They're obsessed. They wear matching outfits. They, you know what I mean? And it becomes, they're trying just as desperately as some of the children to live in this world that, Walt has bequeathed to them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Both of this is yet another parallel is both Lovecraft and Disney had sort of architectural sensibilities when it came to the worlds that they evoked. We talked about this briefly on the Lovecraft episode, that in Michelle Welbeck's book, Against H.P. Lovecraft, Against the World, Against Life, he describes Lovecraft as having an architect's mind in a lot of the worlds that he describes. The most notable example being that story At the Mountains of Madness, where there's not really a plot in the sense of character-driven plot. It's probably not a story that would be published today, because the entire driver of the plot is that there's this 500-million-year-old city in Antarctica, and the more this group of explorers learn about it, the deeper into it they want to go, and the deeper into the city they go, the worse things get, and the deeper they want to go to find stuff that's even worse. It's not super believable as human motivation, but as a reader, that is exactly what you want them to do. And
but it ends up being a compelling description of a scene, of a physical environment, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that passage in Welbeck and thinking Lovecraft would have made a phenomenal theme park designer. As Laird said, you probably wouldn't want to go to Lovecraft land, but at the same, but if you were to go there, it would have a similar design principle to a Disney park. The most interesting stuff would be in the center of each area, and something about the flow of the area of the park would draw you inwards towards this central mystery, which would be the attraction, I guess, as opposed to the alien Shoggoth that kills you in an actual Lovecraft story. But this was a big inspiration for me when I was putting together the first OmniPark anthology, Tales from OmniPark, and also this prequel now that we're doing, Back to OmniPark, because I was fascinated by the idea of what if we could get a collection of fiction stories about this theme park, which actually attracted so much conspiracy lore, but it actually did have some Lovecraftian things at the center of it, and how would different horror authors interpret that?
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I'm stoked to read everybody else. I've only read one contribution to it. That's mine, and I like it. So I imagine I'm looking forward to everybody else.
When I read Laird's story for this book, the immediate reaction that I had was I took a screen cap of one of the paragraphs and I direct messaged it to you, Brad. I was like, that's right. You're gonna love this story. And I'll say when it comes to fiction, I don't really care how many awards a person has won or how famous they are. I know good writing when I see it. I know when I like. And for my money, you, Brad, and Laird are two of my favorite authors alive today. So take that for what it's worth.
That's sweet. You can come back on anytime, Ben. No, thank you. Sincerely, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thinking about a little bit more about Disney. So, I think maybe in the After Dark, patreon.com/Art of Dark pod. I want to tease. We've kind of hit on stuff I already wanted to do then, so maybe we'll kind of switch gears. I do want to talk about some of the conspiracy theories, MK Ultra related, that sort of thing associated with Disney.
I can't go to Disney World.
You're not allowed to go.
I can't go. Like I'm certain something was planted in my brain as a young person.
It probably was. It was planted in all of our brains, I think. Even I went there a couple of years ago, and I'm a fairly cynical, full-grown adult, and I definitely had moments of like, oh, look at that! Like
wait. You're telling me you experienced whimsy?
I did. I skipped at one point. Yeah.
This is a whimsy-free zone.
I will tell you, since we kind of talked about, they have a light show on the castle at night. I think it's every night. And it is, listen, I've been to Burning Man. This is better than anything you see at Burning Man. It is the most insane light show probably on the planet. It's at least anyone that's happening on a regular basis. They are causing like a mass hallucinatory experience for thousands of people on a nightly basis. And I'm not saying there's anything sinister about it, but it is intense. So if you ever go to the Disney park in Florida, is the one in Florida Land or World?
That's World.
If you ever go there, do not leave early. Stay for the light show.
Okay, Brad, stop.
Entry.
Stop.
It's worth the price of entry.
Stop. You're doing an endorsement for Disney World on accident, Brad. Okay,
I can't help it.
Stop.
The real Brad never made it back.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You don't know who you're talking to, Kevin.
Model 9.
Oh, geez.
Well, this actually brings us to, I think, what you were touching on, Brad, which is some connections between weird things associated with Disney and his parks and weird things associated with OmniPark. And this is actually one of the things that I would love to hear Laird's thoughts on, because his OmniPark story is actually set in and around a ride called Nebula Quest, which actually uses some mind-altering technology.
Oh, are you shooting that to me?
Oh, I wanted to see what your thoughts were on the use of mind-altering technology in OmniPark, and yeah.
I actually, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but it's just sort of how my mind works. Like when I'm talking, writing an essay or writing a story, when I'm watching a movie, I mean, I make these very strange non-linear associations, but I tie this all back to my mother was extremely religious and my father was not. He was borderline atheist. So that was we lived in a cabin in the woods for many years. And that was a really strange schism between the two. But when I was older, I remember I went with a family to a potluck. We were living up in the hills and I was renting a cabin from them. They said, "Hey, it's Thanksgiving and you're out on your own. Do you want to come with us to this potluck the church is throwing?" I said, "Sure, it's food." The call and response that took place, I'd never been, even though my mother was religious, they didn't really have call and response like in a Pentecostal or more like really fundamentalist hellfire and brimstone tradition. So it's the first time everybody joined hands and the right reverend led us in very simple call and response sort of situation before we could finally sit down and eat. And I looked around and I was the only one looking around. And because I was an outsider, the hair on my neck was standing up because I was not worried about going to a church. I've been to many churches, but this particular experience was something unearthly almost. And I started in the years after that, and I almost felt like I was going to leave my body. It was like this very kind of like when a police klaxon's hit or fire engines going by, and you get that it's designed to do that. It's designed to freeze you momentarily. I kind of got that a sort of a similar response, except it was much more subtle and it built. And I started paying more attention when I went to places like courthouses or airports or museums, but especially federally funded things that were designed to impress you in some way with your minuteness compared to the establishment, whether that was a private establishment or whether it's government funded or something like that, that you're tiny and we're big. You are one, you're basically you're an ant compared to the mountain that you live under. And I started looking at architecture, sound, things like that, and realizing that so many things, benign or all the way to sinister, are assaulting us constantly. You couldn't walk through a mall without smelling the different scents that they were projecting out of the various shops. When I was a kid, I didn't realize that's what was happening. But as time went on, I went, "Oh, baked bread sells a house. Perfume coming out of the perfume place. Certain music is a Pavlovian association." Well, theme parks. I went to Disneyland in the 90s and it's the same thing. You are being, and not in some kind of conspiratorial, there's not like some kind of MK Ultra thing necessarily going on, but you are definitely being conditioned through saturation of sound, light, frequency, variation, how just the acoustics of the park itself. And it's the same, it's to a similar degree, you're going to run into that almost anywhere you go, be it an airport, a cathedral, a park. There's either naturally occurring or has been designed to affect you in a certain way. I got into color theory, like basically how fast food restaurants use certain colors to encourage you to eat and then get the fuck out. That's what they want. McDonald's doesn't want you loitering. They want your ass out of the seat. So they found out that certain color schemes like yellow, certain types of crimson, sort of bordering on crimson, have a tendency to excite your hunger. But once it's sated, you feel agitated and want to go. Weightlifters, certain colored rooms, they could lift more or less, depending on what the color of the room is. So long-winded way of just saying, I think that there is no question that theme parks are screwing with your mind. To what effect? To get you, well, I mean, in LA, or excuse me, in Vegas, the whole idea of using almost pure oxygen to keep you awake, no clocks anywhere, right? We want you to keep gambling. You're always a mark as a citizen. You are always a mark in many places that you go to. It's just, what do they want from you?
Right. Yeah, I noticed this in Vegas. I there was a time where I went there for work a lot, and so I wasn't even a tourist. I was just there, right? And you'd stay in a casino because that would be the cheapest place to stay in town. You'd get some deal, and just walking through there and being just like completely disoriented. And I felt like I was being put into a mind state where nothing would surprise me. So no matter what came about, I would just be okay with it. That was the impression I got.
Compliance.
Trying to get. Yeah, I'm just like, oh well, I lost $1,000. That's fine. This guy wants to sell me that. That's like just because everything is so dynamic and unpredictable.
Right.
Yeah, it's very strange. And we did an episode on the man who invented the shopping mall, Victor Gruen, and he probably pioneered some of these techniques in a way.
He did. He certainly did pioneer that. And there are countless PhDs right now working on it, working to get you to subscribe to patreon.com/darkpod.
We need to do some research on this.
Because you bring up the mall, and I could be wrong about this, but I've been to Providence quite a few times to the convention that goes, Necronomicon, and to just readings. And there's that mall that the Lovecraft Arts Council is in, and from my understanding is that's the oldest mall in America, actually.
Oh, really?
The arcade, yeah,
might be up there. Yeah, interesting.
Which I think is because it's a Lovecraft conversation, right? Well, there you go.
Yeah. Well, couldn't be old enough that he went there, right? No,
I don't know what year. It's been there.
He died in 37, so it'd be a pretty early mall. I don't.
It's the oldest mall in America. I don't know what year it was built, but it's old. I mean, it has old Gothic looking, architecture. So
very cool. Yeah,
it is. It's neat. It's a neat. It's not what you would think of as a mall at all, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
What's the name of it?
Is it the Westminster Arcade? Is that the one?
I'm going to fumble this. I'd have to look it up. I just know that the Lovecraft Arts Council is there, and it's like it's open. Like when you walk through, you have it's like open air in many places, and it's they've got huge plants growing in it, and old wood balconies. Like old pine or oak. Some of the floors actually are wooden. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, I mean, if it is this Westminster Arcade, it looks a lot like Covent Garden in London, and very interesting, very cool.
I honestly don't know what year.
Yeah, it looks like it was built in 1828. Yeah.
Whoa! So Lovecraft probably did walk around in some version of it's probably been renoed to some degree, but
I've never researched it. It's just that I've been a guest. Because because that's the Arts Council is very much devoted to Lovecraft. That's the backbone of Lovecraftian studies and things like that. And old Hans, the guy that runs the place, he was very proudly told me on multiple occasions, he's the one that said, oh yeah, this is old. And I don't think I ever specifically asked if Lovecraft had visited, but that was certainly, it wouldn't shock me because that was sort of the tone of the conversation, that these halls that Lovecraft had walked. So possibly
free idea out there for any writers, some kind of Lovecraftian horror story about this mall. I think it's rich territory. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, interesting. Good stuff.
Yeah.
What else you got, Brad? Bring it on.
What else do I got? I think there's a bunch of just sort of errata that I came across about Disney, about the parks. But now that we're talking about this connection, I'm starting to think about the various sort of quasi Lovecraftian figures in Disney films. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is Ursula from The Little Mermaid.
Mm-hmm.
There's it would be the devil from Fantasia. From what is it?
Night on Bald Mountain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Night on Bald Mountain. And there's got to be some others that I'm not quite thinking of, but this sort of tentacular, shadowy, somewhat amorphous kind of entity, I think, is probably appearing in there from time to time.
This is a weird, semi-random connection. not that random, actually, that at Epcot Center, I used to go with my family back in the 80s, and there was a ride called Journey into Imagination, which was it had this little dragon called Figment, and they took you through scenes exploring the
Figment.
Yeah, you remember Figment. Yeah. Every scene, it was sort of like a dark ride. It would take you into different rooms, and each room was sort of devoted to a different mode of creative expression. And one of them was writing, and that was always my favorite room because I wanted to be a writer. And there was one little corner of the room where Figment is showing off the wonders of writing, and it says horror, and it has a book that looks like an old Gothic novel, and there's an animated shadow play on the wall of tentacles coming out of the book.
Oh, really? Oh, so that's definitely, is that still there, do you think?
No, that Journey into Imagination has been renovated. They destroyed, along with most of the rest of Epcot, they gutted that ride and replaced it with something else. But
yeah, I'm sure it's probably they probably softened the edges of it, right? And had something that's big, has big dewy eyes, and yeah, very interesting. No, Epcot was I hadn't thought of, I had a little Figment plushie from going to Epcot sometime in the 80s. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, there's an interest. So, I mean, one of the things about Disney and Lovecraft that I think is an interesting connection, and we've sort of touched on it, but maybe there's more here. They're both interestingly, one of the things I was fascinated with about the Lovecraft when we did doing the deep dive research on Lovecraft as a person, was his I mean, he was basically a loyalist to the crown, right? I mean, he what was it? He didn't think America should have ever like gained independence. Is that how that worked?
Yeah, he was a loyalist to the British crown, and when they would stand up to sing not the national anthem, but one of the other
Pledge of Allegiance or something.
Yeah, some other famous American patriotic song, he would stand up and refuse to put his hand over the heart and sing "God Save the King." So yeah,
right. I was reminded of that when I read this apparent fact about the Disney parks, that the American flag, Main Street USA in Disney World, right? So you go in and it's a cartoon version of a imagined little town USA Main Street, and there's little shops that you can go to, and you can, like, you know, if at first glance it looks like it could be a normal street, but it's all clearly selling you Disney merchandise. But there are a whole bunch of, and it ties into Walt's apparent patriotism, but apparently the flags on Main Street USA aren't actually American flags. They appear to be American flags, but they are missing a star or a couple stars, or they don't have all the stripes. And the reason for this, apparently, is so that they don't have to put them at half-mast on a day in which something when we normally put something at half-mast.
Is that true, or is that
this is it's internet?
It looks
true.
like it. Right. Yeah. The flags on Main Street USA are props. Huh. It's internet true. They do have some real American flags.
I'm sure they have some, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this is what it says here on Weird Disney. And it's the Mickey Mouse logo with a spiral in the center.
Ooh.
Because you know what that signifies. Disney World does have some real American flags. In fact, every day since it opened back in 1971, the Magic Kingdom has staged a flag lowering ceremony in Town Square. Okay, why would you stage a flag lowering ceremony?
Because you were trying to call back to an imagined past.
Right. Okay.
You're trying
right. Yeah. But even that is sort of perverse and probably in violation of the flag. Well, who knows? But the ones you see sprinkled around like candy, fake as a $3 bill. That's a good phrase. Interesting, Brad. That's a good pull. I like that.
And it's sort of, the reason that it caught my eye was that it's, to me, is emblematic of something that I don't know that if necessarily Walt was doing it, but Walt's creation of the Disney enterprise does. It's sort of like, we will spend millions of dollars to create the felt experience of patriotism, but when you really get down to it, we're faking it.
We may be fair enough,
Yeah.
but we may be spreading some internet hooey. It's in the background here, but listen to this.
Okay.
So this is another website called Disney-Secrets. Okay. And this says that story isn't true because as Walt created Main Street USA, he knew that even the smallest detail would not only enhance the story, but also help make the magic real. One of the details he included can be found in the flags on Main Street. Difficult to notice. Blah, blah, blah. They have 13 stripes, but they have 45 stars instead of 50. Apparently, this is because Main Street USA is meant to be set between 1890 and 1910.
Oh, you don't want Hawaii and Alaska,
whatever,
and Nevada, and
whatever
the
else.
last 5 are.
Now,
you don't want those included.
Even that is kind of, but maybe it's a yes and thing. Maybe it's like, well, it's not a real American flag, so we don't have to lower it. Well, why? Well, because it's historical and okay.
Yeah, it sounds convenient.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
They may have imagineered an excuse. All right. Dude, we're gonna be redacted for this episode.
We need to get a stronger legal team.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, I don't know if the Nutman Dan Baltic is gonna want the heat from the Disney episode. In any case, this is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well,
speaking of reconstructions, let's not forget that Disney is the theme park, Disney World specifically, that has World Showcase, which is an entire theme park that has recreated mini versions of a whole bunch of countries, which are replicated down to the highest level of detail, because that's what Disney does, right? They have 4 levels of detail going all the way down to things like the color and the quality of the paint and the tiniest little thumbprints on things are all arranged and put there deliberately. So designers traveled around the world and took photographs of these architectural wonders and also small buildings on the street and the way people dressed, came back and replicated them in miniature at a very high level of detail, brought people over from those actual countries who continue to speak their own languages, but wear a Disney-fied version of their national traditional mode of dress, so that you can have a perfectly simulated, but also very Disney-fied and safe experience of being in that country. Just the think about the mentality of a group of people who would conceive of creating something like that.
Right. We'll just go to that place. We'll distill that place to its essence, and then we'll repackage and sell it to you, and then you don't even have to go there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just like
why go
said,
to Sweden?
Whip it down into slurry and pour it wherever you want.
Yeah. Why go to Sweden to eat the meatballs? Just go to Disney. Yeah. Very interesting.
It's an extremely fundamentally American attitude and idea, and it's really safety obsessed, and it represents a fear of the other, a fear of the alien, and a desire to control it, and probably also a certain degree of disgust. And that's not uncommon. I mean, he's trying to extract the middle American dollar out of, and you have to remember too, a lot of people didn't have passports, families. We got to go somewhere safe. Well, we're not going to France. We're not going to Spain. I'd have to learn Spanish.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, that's interesting. I feel like we're maybe getting in another way, which we've already done this a few times, I think, getting to a connection between Disney and Lovecraft again, because I think if you look at a lot of Lovecraft's work, it comes out of an anxiety about the other, as we've discussed, right? I mean, he's transmogrifying his fears and anxieties and insecurities and into actual monsters. Disney's doing a different thing with them, but there's a similarity in the creative impulse, it seems like.
Well, yeah, and there are monsters out there. Let's be real, too. Yeah. I mean, there's some sort of wisdom to this. This is what these folk tales serve to do, and to a degree still serve to do. They're warnings, they're lessons for children.
You'll notice they always have a scary scene or a scary character. They don't work if they don't.
A lot of that Disney stuff, it can be very startling when you're a kid. I mean, I remember Pinocchio, was frightening. He gets turned into a donkey, and it was frightening to me as a very young child.
You remember the hallucinatory elephant sequence in Dumbo? Absolutely terrified me. Oh my god!
He's having DTs. He's having delirium tremens from, it's just like, okay, all right. So interesting, but it's all information, and I still have a soft spot for a lot of that Disney stuff. The Robin Hood, Oodalolly. Come on, man. So good. It's so good. Yeah.
No, I think you end up having some form of love-hate relationship with it. I mean, I'm clearly very fond of, I saw all the Disney movies growing up. I was quite fond of all of them, really, and if Robin Hood popped on, I would definitely watch. That might be my favorite one actually now.
Banger. Yeah.
And seminal for the furry community, I've been told.
Okay, all right.
Jeez.
That's a different show.
Kevin, you've been found out.
Oh, goodness. Folks. Oh, gracious. You found my Reddit alt? Outstanding.
Oh, man.
Just a little fox with a microphone and like
do the voice.
No, I'm not going to do the voice. Good stuff. Yeah. That's fun. Yeah, Disney is so all-encompassing. I mean, it's essentially been an arm of the American government since World War II. I mean, it is the defining American corporation between Disney, IBM. You don't have many companies that are at that tier, Microsoft, Apple, etc. But as far as like media entertainment conglomerates, they created the playbook.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's why DeSantis will ultimately be destroyed.
He picked the wrong enemy, didn't he?
He's not going to win that battle. Ultimately.
You can go up against the deep state. You can go up against one of the major political parties.
That's
you can go up against the church. But if you go up against Disney,
the mouse in America,
come armed for bear. Yeah.
I'm not even joking.
It's
ultimately for just pragmatic reasons. That's the end of him.
Well, he had. I mean, that's an interesting thing. You're not going up against an enemy or a rival that you're just going to have to face in court. They, what is the thing? Never pick a fight with somebody who buys ink by the barrel, right? It's that sort of situation. I mean, they own half the media, so
I mean, and spiritually, on some level, yes, I understand. This isn't a political podcast, but we are talking about Walt Disney, and it is political. It's on some sort of psychic, spiritual level when you pick on Disney in the American like perma zeitgeist, right? The zeitgeist we have. It's like you're attacking the American dream on some level. You're probably right, Laird. He maybe picked the wrong mouse to go after.
I think so. No, I'm actually really glad to have had this conversation because, I've never really consciously analyzed my feelings about Disney. I've had feelings, but no, the more that we talk about, the more I'm not even talking about the fun conspiracy theories and stuff. I mean, I grew up, I live at light years from Disneyland in Alaska in the 1970s. But that was someplace you wanted to go. You wanted to go to Disneyland someday, and you loved the movies and the shows, the musicals, and all this good stuff. But strangely enough, I mean, Walt Disney actually had a dark reputation in my household and among some of the friends that I had when I was growing up. And I'm not kidding. I mean, there was always talk.
Walt Disney, the man.
Yeah, not the idea that the place was sort of sinister was more of a rebellious youth. When you start, you get into the college age years, you start going, oh man, the man. Right. When I was right, they don't treat their workers right, man.
Right.
They got tunnels, they haul the bodies away, man. You can't. I mean, Law and Order, right? Back in the 80s, did an episode where the guy that voices not Homer, maybe it's Homer. He was at a place just like Disney, and they wouldn't let him take off his costume to vomit. And so he almost choked to death. And so he was suing them because they had you can never, no matter how sick you are, you can never, if you die in that suit, we're going to have two guys kind of pretend you're walking. So that was later. No, when I was a kid, it was, I'm sure it's, lies, damn lies, but it was how he was he was secretly a German or a Nazi sympathizer. And so he was into the occult, Satanism, and other dark Gnostic traditions. And that when he died, they had preserved his head. I think in the stories that I always heard when I was a kid, it was his head is somewhere like Ted Hughes, it's or Ted Williams, it's somewhere, in a vault waiting to be reanimated when we have the technology, give him an android body or something like that. I'm not speaking to how crazy these theories are, but these are my mom hated him. She said, oh, he's a Satanist.
Really?
Oh yeah. That there's satanic or
oh, for sure. Oh yeah. And you have this
throughout his.
Oh, and there is. I mean, I was just poking around DisneyDailyDime.com.
Like alchemical stuff, that you name it, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom.
That's right.
Yeah. In the fire station, you can pick up cards for a magical scavenger hunt. I mean, already you're losing the fundamentalists. I mean, already.
Yeah. So they were poisoning me against him. But actually what was my big break with Disney when I was a kid wasn't any of that. Because I turned into an atheist in time, or at least quasi-atheist. I broke with Disney. At least the wonder vanished to the point that when I went to Disneyland in the 90s, I was just angry more than I was. I was just annoyed the whole time I was there. I was like, this sucks. You have to either be with a girl or you have to be with your kids. Like, in other words, you have to be there for a mission. Going there just as a 22-year-old dude was like with friends.
You just went with friends.
It was like we had a guy that actually was a VP of Universal Studios set us up, and we went, and like 5 of us went. It was fun, but it wasn't an experience for footloose, fancy-free youth.
Yeah, you're not the target.
Even a hick from Alaska. I was just like, but no, what my break was with him was Bambi. So I grew up watching Bambi. It's terrible, it's sad, but it's this beautiful thumper. There's all this nice stuff most of the time. Then you read the book, and actually, the first time my mom read it to me after I was in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and my mom read it to me because it's not that long. It's like a novella, the German, the translated German edition, and holy fuckamoly, that's like a horror story, and
is it? I don't know anything about the book.
Shit, dude, it's the scene in the cartoon. Sorry for spoilers, everybody, but when Bambi's mom gets shot, basically off camera, right? But then he goes to her and she's lying there. That's the whole goddamn book, except way darker than that.
Really?
And it follows. It's like you talk about Heart of Darkness. Yeah. It's like he becomes Kurtz. Bambi becomes sort of like Kurtz by the end. He becomes the old stag, and he gets shot at one point during the book, and the old stag of the wood comes and helps him elude the hounds, and then he like helps him sort of, I forget how it worked, but basically poulticed him. Like, you lie down in this mud and this will seal the wound because he got like a bullet hole through him. And there was just all this tension and just darkness interspersed with beautiful bits of light. I mean, it wasn't all downer, but
it sounds good.
Traditionally Germanic, dark, nihilistic. Like, even the end is a happy ending, but kind of the world keeps turning, and the darkness, you'll be the old stag and you'll die alone in the woods one day too, my son. But that's really what the book is about, is you eventually die. Your friends all die or abandon you or get shot by hunters, and you will die alone in the woods after you breed a bunch of, does. And that's going to be the end of you. And I just I look at Bambi, and I look at this, I look at that. I'm like, you motherfucker.
Right.
That's not what this is. And then of course, not long after that, you touching on what you guys said about Grimm fairy tales. Oh, you mean they didn't? I forget what happened to the stepmother in the cartoon, but nothing terrible. Like, if she fell or something minor. I mean, she was dealt with, but in a sanitary way. And the original, the original text, the dwarves they heat at the wedding. They heat up iron shoes and clap them on her feet. I think Neil Gaiman actually touched on that. He actually did a story that actually utilized that. They made her dance to death in hot and red hot iron slippers. So I'm looking at him going, you liar.
Right. Yeah. Liar. You took all this dark, heavy, intense stuff and just turned it into Thumper, which everybody loves Thumper. Yeah.
And I that was my reaction as a child, is you're a liar.
Right.
Not that it wasn't good. I still thought they were good. I enjoyed Disney movies. I'm a human being, but as a kid, that was my actual reaction: is you lying sack of shit. This is not, Well, I was outraged.
Yeah. Well, and this is worth lingering over, because I'm on the Bambi Wikipedia, and in 1936, the Nazis banned the original as a political allegory on the treatment of Jews in Europe, and many copies of the novel were burned, making original first editions rare and hard to find. Not a big fan of book burning on this podcast, as a rule. We are book respecters. Periodically, you'll see us on the books charts in Apple Podcasts, right? Not a fan of book burning. But you have to ask, like, what's worse? Burning the copies of the book, or totally re-engineering the meaning and the soul of something and just consuming it and making your version of it the
Kevin,
de facto.
It's one of the darkest fucking things I've ever heard, and there's a little too much. There's too much to think. I mean, that's
It's a tricky.
No, it's right. It's not a zero-sum game, so we can hate both. But you're right. In some ways, you are never going to burn the idea. That book will come out. That idea will come out again. But to warp it, to lobotomize it, essentially, right?
Yeah.
I was. One of the things I was going to say earlier is that I'm not a big activist against Disney or anything like that. I like I said, I enjoy my sports ball, and I don't care who brings it to me necessarily. Sure. But and if you give me a good, and I've laughed my ass off at the Emperor's New Groove and things like that. But I will.
There's some great Disney movies. Right. I mean, this was what's kind of the intention of talking about.
The Lion King is an all-time banger. All-time banger.
Especially when he throws the lion cub off the cliff instead of raising him up. But no, the alternate version, the one that didn't play so well with the audience. But the point is I was going to use the word, neutering, that they neutered these cultures, and that they, and maybe in some ways that is the correct term, to make safe, in the sense of not to desexify them, but to just make them, to pacify, to make them safe. And I think lobotomization and pacification, whether it's intentional to that degree, or whether it's just a subconscious manifestation, our manifestation of their his subconscious and his crew's subconscious, it's a very dark. When you look at it that way, it's extremely dark what they did. Like I said, as a child, I didn't know it was an allegory, or would never have suspected that. I just knew that I was being lied to, not tricked, like, in a fun way, like, oh, Santa Claus, we all know Santa Claus is not real, but we're going to pretend Dad, Uncle Bill, Santa Claus. No, in a, somebody's fucking with my head. And as a child, I wasn't able to articulate that, or I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to understand exactly what it was. But damn it, kids do know. And I was nothing special. When I saw it, I knew it, and it just took me many years to go why that bothered me so much. And I think that actually Kevin hit it in a nutshell. This is what in some ways this is what they did.
Yeah. Wow.
They poisoned it, lobotomized it, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
I learned a new phrase. Holy fuck-a-moly.
I like it.
Good,
I like it.
That's my Janet Reed, who was an agent for me for many years.
Okay.
She would every now and then she'd say, "Holy fuck-a-moly. We just got lowballed." In our latest song. The big five guy that we were hoping was going to give us a bunch of money lowballed us.
Oh man.
Yeah, Janet Reed, God bless her.
Well, here's a sentence I never thought I was going to say. Now I really want to read Bambi.
I know, right?
Because Laird Barron recommended it.
I know. You were describing it. I was like, this sounds awesome.
It's as good as I haven't read it in many years.
Yeah.
But as far as I'm concerned, I did read it years after, but it's probably been 25, 30 years since I've read it. I think it's as good as Heart of Darkness.
Wow.
So, I wouldn't compare them necessarily. Like, don't read it going, but it gives you that. Well, it's similar time periods too, of the authors and stuff, right? The writing was like, there's a generational thing there, but the bottom line is, I hope it holds up, but it really has profoundly affected my writing.
Wow.
Just subconsciously.
Wow. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on the hour here. I definitely want to check that out. Maybe we have to cover the fellow who wrote it at some point. I do have good news for everybody. On November 21st of 2022, a live action horror film titled Bambi: The Reckoning was announced. The film will be about the titular character getting revenge after the death of his mother, and the film is expected to begin principal photography in mid-2023.
It's in the public domain now, right? So
it must be right. Bambi, the Reckoning. Yeah,
very interesting.
What are we talking about on the After Dark, Brad?
Well, we're going to talk. We've kind of hinted at various conspiracy theories, but we're actually going to talk about some of the verifiable work that Walt did with the U.S. government. Basically, was Walt Disney a spy of some sort? He was at least a propagandist. So we're going to actually talk about some of the specific details about that. And I think there's some interesting events in Walt's life and some interesting things produced by Disney that tie into this. And this isn't even like far afield, hey man, this is like, he actually went to South America and ... So we're going to talk about that. And then maybe I'm sure we'll have a couple other odds and ends that we'll want to continue on. Again, thank you, Laird, and thank you, Ben. Kickstarter for OmniPark, back to OmniPark. Ben, why don't you just pump that up for a second?
Back to OmniPark is on Kickstarter, as you said, Brad. It is funding right now. We still have hardcover copies and softcover copies left, as well as other cool stuff like Tuckerizations, where you can die as a character in a horror story. It's got all new original stories. When I say all new original stories, I mean they are exclusive to this anthology by Laird Barron, Jonathan Mayberry, Haley Piper, Brian Evenson, A.C. Wise, Angela Yuriko Smith, and a whole bunch of other fantastic horror and weird fiction writers. Again, it's a collection of weird stories set at a theme park that attracted a huge amount of conspiracy theorizing, and it's based on the premise of what if all the conspiracy theories were true. Many of today's greatest horror authors examining those topics in fiction. Go check it out. Kickstarter and search for Back to OmniPark.
Love it. Yeah, and we'll have a link to that in the show, as well as links to find Laird and Ben on social media. Yeah, thank you guys. Much appreciated. We'll be back in a little bit for our beloved Patreon fam.
Yes, get in there. Support independent media. We all can't be the mouse. Thanks, guys.